Manko is a game developed over time since the Edo period of Japan. Back in those days, small clay figures were used. Different art and etchings of deities made certain figures more desirable in local neighborhoods, with the goal of the game being to win your opponent's Minucci by flipping them over with your own. The explosion in popularity of cardboard in the late 1800s would see a revolution in the game, allowing for widespread commercialization of Manko cards. Popular military figures like that of the samurai were distributed, and as Japan started to become an imperial military power, cards of battleships, airplanes, and other iconography became popular. After World War II, baseball players and manga characters began to make their way onto the cards. While the artwork of Manko cards made no difference in the strategy of the game, they were integral to its appeal, a reason to play the game and a reason to win. While most people know of Richard Garfield and think of him as the sole visionary who changed the world of tabletop forever and created the TCG genre, the alpha set of Magic the Gathering was a collaboration, and possibly no one is as important to the overall feel of card games than this man.
My name is Jesper Muirfors. I was the original art director for Wizards of the Coast. I did the graphic design on Magic, so if you've seen the card back, you've seen my work.
He had been working for Wizards of the Coast for a couple of months when he was brought on to be art director for a new fledgling game, and one of his first decisions would be the thing that changed card games forever. Instead of purchasing rights to existing art pieces, they would commission new pieces, all of which were required to be hand-drawn. These decisions would give Magic a distinct look and feel, with his personal preference towards gothic horror as well as the Lovecraftian, providing inspiration to push many of the game's early artwork to this aesthetic. Its original set was composed of art by 25 different artists, including Jesper himself. I also think it's really worth mentioning that MTG had nothing before it to reference. There was nothing to say, this is how a card game should be made. So the way that they went about designing cards was to give the 25 original artists the card name and tell them to just draw whatever they thought fit that card name as best as possible. The artwork in early Magic pushed it beyond just that of a simple children's game. Muirfors' vision was that the art adorning these small pieces of cardboard could stand alone as true masterpieces, works that would outlive the game they were made for. Muirfors' own work in Alpha consists of some of the most unsettling and borderline disturbing cards in early Magic. There is a subtlety to his art, like the faint skull in the moon, or the way the smoke around the demonic hordes renders many of them almost invisible. And of course, one of the greatest card arts of all, Word of Command. When you stare into the abyss stares back. Many of Alpha's art pieces made their way into the garage of Peter Adkinson, the CEO of Wizards, as well as around the offices of their headquarters near Seattle. The art had created a fever for the company, but it also had effects in the real world. Magic's first expansion was a massive success, forcing them to reprint it multiple times just to try and keep up with the demand. The gritty artwork set the tone for the game and made it feel visually distinct from other games that were coming out at the same time, especially important when trying to establish a new genre. It wasn't long before other companies tried to jump on the trend and release their own collectible card games. Of course, for me, it would be the 10th edition that first introduced me to Magic the Gathering. Free 60-card sample decks handed out at Comic-Cons. I distinctly remember getting green, blue, and black. The first card I ever saw was Natural Spring. I was in awe of the refreshing water and lush green of the art. While the blue and green cards filled me with awe of natural environments, resourceful elves, and strange flying beasts, the black deck would instill in me feelings I didn't know how to handle. Disgust from cards like Dross Crocodile, fear with Severed Legion and Assassinate, and a combination of the two in arts like Terror. Magic had given me a peek into their world, and I wanted more. While I really had no one to play with, since most of the kids I knew played card games like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh!, I loved to spend hours looking through the artwork of the cards. Eventually, my brother-in-law would give me his collection of older cards from Unlimited through the end of Onslaught block. Seeing the older artwork gave me an even bigger appreciation for the game. More than 10 years later, I'm finally talking about the artwork that filled me with so much excitement back then. As a kid, I always really hated the visual design of Ice Age. Of course, nowadays I can look back and appreciate a lot of Ice Age's art and the world. Cards like Icequake, Fielga, and Foxfire are some of my favorites. Of course, while Jesper wanted each individual piece of art to stand on its own, I think where Magic has shined the most recently is in the tapestry of story its artworks can tell throughout an expansion block. This works really well in sets like Streets of New Capenna, where the art shows the seedy underbelly of the city. The 5 demon mob bosses have a specific aesthetic in their gang, and the card art is oozing with fun and frisky criminal activity. The cards are somewhat standalone pieces of art, but when looked at together you get a greater feel for the world the set creates. Compare that to another recent set like War of the Sparks. This set is extremely self-referential. Almost every enchantment, instant, and sorcery features one of the Planeswalkers or Nicol Bolas. Cards like Deliver Unto Evil, Commence the Endgame, Tyrant Scorn, and Finale of Promise show Nicol Bolas' storyline throughout the saga. Command the Dreadhorde shows the moment Liliana takes control of Nicol Bolas' army, while Planewide Celebration and Finale of Glory show the heartwarming victory. The storylines told through these cards are certainly what gives this set life, but it's also just a constant reminder that there is nothing except the War of the Sparks. The world this war takes place in no longer matters. It feels like it could be happening anywhere and it wouldn't make a difference. All that matters is the Planeswalkers. The Triumph cycle of cards feels the most emblematic of the issue. The Planeswalker depicted staring at you in triumph while their victory sits in the background. All possible subtlety of the art is gone. War of the Sparks is loud and relies heavily on cameos of popular characters to keep both the story and art interesting. Toll of the Invasion is one of the few cards that actually feels mature and shows a different side of the war, and Ravnica at War is a masterpiece, showing what truly is at stake in this battle between larger-than-life figures. That's more or less where Magic is today. Some sets feel like slam dunks that have been meticulously planned out, and others feel like self-serving fan service. And oh god, I really did not want to talk about Universes Beyond, but I can't not mention it. Everything I have just talked about, in terms of aesthetic and world building, is completely thrown aside by endless waves of popular IP sludge. It's not really within the realm of the art of the games to fully discuss all the issues that come with including Doctor Who and Transformers into the MTG universe, but at the very least, it does ruin the fundamental strength that allowed MTG to thrive in the first place. Those art pieces that were powerful enough to drive Alpha forward, strong enough on their own to be hung up on walls, it's impossible to believe that the game would have ever found its success or identity if it had just started by merely printing other stories into its world. The decision by Jesper Myrfors to make sure that none of the art was reused, and to commission artists to come in and give them artistic liberty to create what they best thought fit, is gone completely, and that is a genuine shame. Of course, Magic was not my first foray into card games, or my last. The gritty, realistic, and sometimes violent art of MTG was a stark contrast to the flashy, sleek, and often cartoonish art of Yu-Gi-Oh! While now anime girls are synonymous with Yu-Gi-Oh!, early sets were heavily centered around weird places, creatures, and objects. One thing that I think really sets many of the cards apart from MTG are the backgrounds. More often than not, abstract colors and patterns fill in the gaps in card arts, putting more focus on the monster or character depicted. I particularly love the colorful background in a card like Soul Release, with the movement lines that add momentum to Labyrinth Tank's artwork. The backgrounds aren't here to distract from the main art, but serve as visual complements that give many of the characters in early Yu-Gi-Oh! A feeling that they are from another dimension. Water creatures are given blue backgrounds, and fire is given red and orange. The background of a card like Frenzied Panza just adds to its feeling of rage. Because of this, field spells have a unique feeling. Their art depicts more extensive environments, ones not usually present on many of the other cards. This is the greatest strength and weakness of early Yu-Gi-Oh! I would argue that the original Blue Eyes White Dragon is as iconic as it is because of these design decisions. The very faint background behind the dragon allows for him to take center stage completely. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s art direction benefited from the decision to immediately start with holographic foil cards. Many of the early Ultra and Secret Rares have bare bones backgrounds to better facilitate the look of them on holographic cardboard. Cards like Gaia the Dragon Champion, Dark Magician, and Red Eyes Black Dragon were designed with the foil in mind, and as such, look muted and ugly in non-foil reprints. The erratic nature of the art in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a reflection of the world that it attempts to capture. The lore of Yu-Gi-Oh! Exists to serve individual storylines around the characters rather than an extensive world around them. Monsters like Gagagigo, Dark Ruler Hades, and Sangan appear in multiple card arts, and through line of plot can be found by looking at all of their cards. But it's a far cry from the massive world building done through the art of MTG. However, in some ways, this allows certain Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards to stand truly alone as works of art. One card in particular comes to my mind, Yomi Ship. 3 unknown creatures row a boat under a bright red sky. The Japanese translation is more accurately Ship to Yomi, the Shinto land of the dead. They are ferrymen to the afterlife. Despite that, this card is not referenced anywhere else, and in the game, Yomi is not referred to in such a way again. This artwork and card is one of a kind, a stand-alone great work in my opinion. Cards like this bear a sad reminder of another difference Yu-Gi-Oh! Has in its art direction. While every Magic card bears a credit to the artist, it would be hard-pressed to find the name of the creator of any Yu-Gi-Oh! Card art. A legitimate shame, and one that might be metaphoric of the design philosophy. The room for artistic expression is much narrower. Cards have a slicker, streamlined aesthetic. Characters on the cardboard are much more easily recognizable, no matter what other card they may appear on. While alternative artworks exist and are frequently made for iconic cards like Blue Eyes and Dark Magician, Yu-Gi-Oh! Reprints generally reuse the same familiar artwork. Cards like Terraforming and Dust Tornado have received almost 30 reprints while never changing the artwork. Yu-Gi-Oh!'s art would start to hit its stride in later expansions. While the earliest card sets might have been extremely simple in design, by the time you get to Legacy of Darkness, it starts to feel mature, abstractly beautiful, and even grim. Spirit cards in particular hit perfect notes of mysterious, whimsical, and serene. Cards like Yatagarasu and Susa Soldier are just as apt place in the set as Great Long Nose. Recurring characters like Hades, Warrior Digrepher, and Tyrant Dragon find their way onto multiple cards, which gives the set a cohesive feeling. Art like that of Life-Absorbing Machine and Ominous Fortune-Telling delve into the macabre aesthetic. The backgrounds start to become even more intricate on monster cards and equip spells, while field spells like Pandemonium are more of a flex of muscle for the artists. I always loved and was really disturbed by the art of Really Eternal Rest. Invasion of Chaos and Ancient Sanctuary also have some personal favorites of mine. Less than 1 year later though, Yu-Gi-Oh! GX would be fully in swing, and the Lost Millennium would be printed with the elemental hero archetypes, which would dominate the next few years of Yu-Gi-Oh! As the game and its artwork would fundamentally change as it went forward. Later sets like The Light of Destruction, Ancient Prophecy, and Extreme Victory feel sanitized, too scared to step outside the box that the powerful and ever-present archetypes demand. Every set contains its standout cards, of course, usually Spell and Traps, where the artists are given more room to show intricate scenarios and environments. Bubble Bringer and Abyss Sphere have always stuck with me from the Abyss Rising set. This copy of Abyss Sphere is another aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! Art that I've always loved, the ultimate rare. Starting with Soul of the Duelist, ultimate rares are embossed, giving the artwork gravity. As a kid, these cards were prized possessions, one that I would go out of my way to make big trades for. Most recently though, Ultimate Rares have moved out of the common booster box, moving to tournament packs instead, an incentive for players to participate in Konami-sanctioned events. It's hard to imagine I would have been able to collect any of these as a kid under this new system. Another thing to mention with Yu-Gi-Oh! Card art is how often it breaks the fourth wall. Actual Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards appear on the art of multiple cards, usually in a way that highlights the effect of the cards. While Spell and Trap cards like Shift use an almost cartoonish way of showing off how the effect works. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not afraid to have a little fun with its cards, and because there isn't such a focus on each set being tied to a particular world, no card, no matter how wild it is, feels out of place. And this is the portion of the video where I expected to go off on how modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just worse and the card art has only gone downhill, anime waifus are running rampant. But that's not quite what I see. While certain archetypes still lead to bland, uncreative, and repetitive artwork, others flourish with flashy, expressive, and sprawling card art. Monsters like the Ragnaraka or the Sangan and Tenpai archetype are genuinely great works of art. And that's where my praises were going to stop, and then I was reminded of the goatee archetype. These massive cosmic space fishes are honestly some of my favorite card game art. There's such a sense of scale and wonder. Their translucent bodies help to illuminate and reflect the galaxies behind them. These are monsters that take perfect advantage of the simple background aiding the card art that was such a staple of early Yu-Gi-Oh! A bigger issue of more modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Is less the actual skill or quality of the art, but the need for characters to be oversaturated with extra details.
We got a sword, okay? We've got wings, we've got feathers, we've got armor, and we've got a gun. What kind of fit is going on here? What are those, knee pads?
Big monsters need to be flashy, and sometimes that means giving them an increasingly complex number of weapons, limbs, or accessories. If Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my first real attempt at playing card games, Pokemon was in my life before I even knew what a card game was. My sisters always had Pokemon cards, and I got my first Pokemon cards when I was 2. I doubt it was the first pack I actually opened, but this Mischievous is my oldest memory of Pokemon. Early Pokemon had a similar art decision. Foil rares have similarly sparse backgrounds, focusing instead on the Pokemon in the foreground. But once you get to the non-foils, you'll start to see more detailed environments of the Pokemon world. Cards like Base Set Dragonair, Jungle Butterfree, and Fossil Ammonite show that the Pokemon team wasn't afraid to spend effort on the backgrounds, even if they haven't figured out the best way to do that in each card. Part of this is the importance for the first printing of each card to look right, present the Pokemon in a way that is unmistakable. By minimizing the amount of background noise and focusing more on the Pokemon itself, fans of the video game and then emerging anime could instantly recognize the Pokemon in the card while also having a good idea of what Pokemon they hadn't seen were supposed to look like. Unlike Magic, the art of the base set of the Pokemon TCG was almost entirely the work of 3 people. Ken Sugimori, who was responsible for giving official art to all of the original 151 Pokemon, Mitsuhiro Arita, the man who has drawn the most Pokemon cards of any other, and Keiji Kinabuchi, a digital 3D artist who designed almost all of the early trainer cards. I cannot stress enough how the work of these 3 made Pokemon what it is today. They would get help from Kagamaru Himeno starting in Jungle, and the success of the first 3 sets would launch Pokemon into its status as a global phenomenon.
The hottest thing in the 12 and under set is coming soon to a theater near you. Pokemon the movie joins Pokemon the video game and Pokemon the trading card as must-sees and must-haves.
Armed with a larger team of artists, Team Rocket Set, released worldwide in April 2000, would start to vary the artwork up a little bit. A lot of the foil rares now have added details, such as Team Rocket members in the background of Dark Slowbro and Dark Magneton. A lot of cards have a bolder approach, with many of the Pokemon having smug or even menacing expressions. The card art isn't as rigid. The Pokemon are now in interesting poses with interesting backgrounds. Dark Dugtrio is seen breaking into someone's house, Dark Machoke is about to throw a boulder at the viewer, and Dark Wartortle looks like he's trying to sell drugs. The Rocket set pushed the limits of what the Pokemon TCG would do with its characters and the situations and emotions that could be displayed on a card. Many of the non-rares even feature art styles unlike anything seen before. This trend would more or less continue, with some cool designs on foil cards but few risks. New Revelation in 2001 would be a stark contrast. The set is packed full of colorful commons, intricate rares, and even finally detailed foils. From whimsical card arts like Jumpluff to subtle masterpieces like Crobat, to the beautiful art style of Sumiyoshi Kazuki, this set truly is a vibrant and exciting new arc in Pokemon's art style, combining styles and techniques while pushing the boundaries of a piece of cardboard. In the next set, Neo Dynasty would take the grounds made here and in Team Rocket and explode. Neo Destiny is irreverent, flashy, and takes every risk possible. Cards like Dark Ampharos, Dark Typhlosion, and Dark Houndoom hit JoJo's Bizarre Adventure level posing. Toshinao Aoki's art uses shadows and proportions to comedic effect, while Tomozaki Tomiya's art feels like pages from a horror manga. The light and dark juxtaposition of the set allows for a card like Friendly Light Machamp to feel at home as much as a Dark Gengar. The set would expand its secret rares as well, adding on many staples as shining foils. Pokemon art would really change for the better from here on out, with newer sets having increased variation in the card art and dynamic posing and expression. And a big source of that is the exciting energy that's in the new, larger-than-life Pokemon card types. EX cards would be released in 2003's EX Ruby and Sapphire, and ever since, they have been a staple of power and splashy card art in Pokemon. They expanded on this concept numerous times over the years with the Star, X-Level, and V cards. These are often cards that are just bursting out of the frames. Pokemon's card art now is anything but boring. Foil rares take up the whole card with explosive and interesting designs, and even non-rares feature card art that has its own story to tell. I'm particularly a fan of the Totodile line in Temporal Forces. It's such a simple design, but really gives them a feeling of being real animals, which is so refreshing for Pokemon. In some ways, the new art has really come a long way from the old, but in other ways it's hard not to miss the more simple design and iconic ones that felt like you were really collecting the Pokemon themselves, not just another piece of cardboard. I think you can really tell with these two the difference in the art philosophy, from even the fact that the square art box has been squished into a rectangle. It's like it's mimicking the overall switch for Pokemon from a box on the Game Boy to the widescreen aspect ratio of the Switch. I always really liked the early design of Pokemon's trainer cards. They have this super surreal look to them for no reason, or just absurd concepts. As the sets go on for Pokemon though, I feel like they start to lose that charm. They definitely don't look bad, but they're way more matter of fact about the effect or characters they depict. It's a little sanitized. Like, let's just look at the available trainer cards for the newest set, Surging Sparks, and compare it to the base set of Pokemon. I love how wacky the art is in a card like Scoop Up and Gust of Wind, or the Web 2.0 art aesthetic of Computer Search, or even the mugshots of Professor Oak and his counterpart. Comparatively, half of Surging Sparks trainer cards are supporters, with characters from the story, and that's fine, but they have this overly polished aspect to them that look like a ripped screenshot from the video games. And then you look at something like Meddling Memo or Deduction Kit, and something just feels bland. I think part of it is a byproduct of the reclassification they did on trainer cards. Now that they have a distinct item category for cards that aren't supporters or stadiums, it's hard to work with wackier concepts. A card like Goop Gas Attack doesn't fit any of those categories. Having these distinctions is obviously for gameplay reasons, and I can't argue with that, but it's hard not to see a trend of the card art taking a hit. This is also kind of a BS excuse though, because they still reprint cards like Switch all the time that just don't have a fun vibe, so. And look, even saying all this, there are some newer trainer card art decisions that I absolutely love. I really like the signed supporter cards from Crown Zenith, and some of the more boring supporter cards look great in their variant artworks, which unfortunately might just be the problem. See, I mentioned a lot of new card arts being fun and flashy, but a lot of them are only that way if you get a special variant edition of the card. For example, the hugely popular character Lacey. Would you rather have this version of the card, which is a kind of standard looking supporter card, or this version where the character you presumably like takes up the whole card and is way more in focus? No? Okay, how about this card that actually is good? A full expressive scene of her showing off her signature pose, her dynamic with other members of the league, and just in general, a way more captivating art piece. Also, the price goes up to an absurd degree between each of these variations. So maybe, just maybe, there's an incentive to print some of these characters in boring fashion on their common card arts. Just look at the regular Alolan Executor EX and the much rarer Illustration Rare variant. What is the real cost of a never-ending spiral of variant artworks, foils, and rares? I didn't want this entire video to be about that topic, so this is just a very brief breakdown of my feelings. I heavily recommend The Glimmer by Ristic Studies for a more detailed perspective of this though. But it does feel like it's become a problem now more than ever in card games. Digital card games like Marvel Snap, Pokemon Pocket, Magic Arena, and of course Hearthstone heavily rely on the alt artwork model as part or all of their monetization. Now it's not just enough to collect a copy of your favorite card or the card you need for your deck. You need to get the signature alternate foil rare signed edition with special cinematic and sound effects. Whoa! And in the real world, have fun spending $16 quintillion on your one-of-one One Ring artwork. Variations like this give up their unified art design in exchange for a shiny dangling set of keys to get players to shell out increasingly large amounts of money. And I am so serious about this right now. These are real Magic the Gathering cards. You can go and buy these right now for an ungodly amount of money. And I just want to put in a little clarification here because it does sound like I'm being overly critical of Pokemon specifically in this aspect. And I think it's because Pokemon uses the model both the best and the worst. It uses it the best because the variant art that Pokemon makes is actually incredible. There are so many cool variant art designs that Pokemon has that it's hard to criticize it because they're stretching the limits of what type of art can be put on a piece of cardboard. And I think that's phenomenal for card games. My only real criticism is that these beautiful card arts are locked behind paywalls. And sometimes I feel like that can come at the detriment of the more basic and common card arts. Now, in general, I just think that Pokemon's card art is still phenomenal all around. I just think that because they have such a financial incentive to make these cards, they go a little overboard sometimes. The more the artwork strays from the aesthetic of the original game, the more it feels like a playground collectible Manko card for children, rather than the unique works of art that Jesper Myrfors fought for in card games so long ago. I made this video because I'm nostalgic. Nostalgic for a childhood that revolved around these card games. The hours spent looking at their art, imagining the world that they existed in. That's something no other piece of media can really replicate in my opinion. The ability to own pieces of an expansive world, of fun and exciting characters, is so magical. I've enjoyed digital card games like Hearthstone, and I had considered talking about it in this video, but the art of physical TCGs means so much more. It's the difference between looking at a picture of a great painting on your phone and going to see it in person at a museum. That physical contact really makes a difference, and the best that card games have to offer really does remind you of great works of art. This video is a bit cynical of the present and future of TCGs, and definitely has rose-tinted glasses on it, but it's hard for me not to see the trends going through all of these games. And I really want to stress that I believe the artists who work on these games are still doing a phenomenal job and are themselves very talented. The actual quality of the art is still quite high for these games. But I think as card games become more and more streamlined, as more years of cards and characters pile on, the temptation is there for companies to stop caring, to stop fighting for unique and exciting card art direction, especially if they can repackage the fun, flashy art as a more expensive product. The era of putting great works of art in the hands of everyday players may be at an end.